Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. I'm here with Chris Aviles. He is the Teched Up Teacher. If you do not know who that is, you can find his website techedupteacher.com. Chris is a middle school teacher at Knollwood, which is in Fairhaven, New Jersey. And he has been teaching. I don't know how long you've been at the middle school. I know you used to teach high school, Chris, but tell us a little bit about your educational background, if you will, teaching background.
Yeah, I like to say I'm a recovering high school English teacher. I taught high school English for 10 years.
Okay.
And then for the last 5 years, I run a program called Fairhaven Innovates, which is my school district's 21st Century Life Technology and Career Program.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so I've been doing that for 5 years.
And how was that born? I mean, did you just come to them and say, we need to do this, or was this something that you were tasked with, or how was this born?
So it was something I was tasked with. I was very happy teaching high school English.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing what I would call innovation projects where students could spend 1 day a week doing whatever it is that they wanted to do. We just asked, I just asked them that they told us about it at the end of the year. And I had started my blog recently and was getting a lot of really good traction. You know, what happens when we listen to student voice and choice. And Fairhaven District kind of reached out and said, we have an opportunity. We need somebody to work with our teachers during the day. During the mornings to better use technology. And then in the afternoons over at the middle school, the technology teacher was retiring, and she had been basically teaching the Microsoft suite and touch typing. And 5 years ago is when, STEM was really hot.
Mm-hmm.
And so they asked, could you kind of put together a program in the afternoons for sixth graders? And so I started this program called Fairhaven Innovates. It started out as a makerspace, and it eventually evolved into entrepreneurship, because we realized that we had a bunch of stuff that we made lying around our innovation lab. And when I asked students what we wanted to do with it, they said sell it. And so from there, we kind of launched these student-run businesses that I've been doing for the last 4 years. And so the program has expanded. I don't work with teachers anymore. I now see 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in the morning for an entrepreneurial makerspace kind of experience. And then I have 4th and 5th grade in the afternoon, which is a more basic kind of makerspace, getting them ready for the entrepreneurship experience in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
And there's a lot, as on the podcast, I've talked a little bit about the ecosystem that's around esports. Entrepreneurship fits right into esports.
It's part of the, what I see as the 3 tenets of why esports is so valuable in education. Entrepreneurship, fits right into that, not only from the college and career kind of readiness standpoint, but if we're serious about talking about STEM jobs and getting our kids into these jobs, esports is the fastest growing industry in the world right now. And it's hard to believe that a lot of these STEM jobs and even some of your more traditional jobs are going to be in the esports space.
And it's not even just that the jobs are there, it's that the kids are already intrinsically motivated to want to be in that space. Yeah,
I mean, the kids who are into video games, I'll tell you, part of what I think makes my esports program special, not to get ahead of itself, but, we partner with a lot of colleges here in New Jersey. And we recently had Rutgers in to talk to our kids and play a match against us. And the kid from Rutgers that resonated with my team so much was a student who said, oh, I want to be an accountant, but I love video games, so I'm going to try to be an accountant at an esports team. And so a lot of my kids kind of had a new perspective that I could pursue a more traditional job, marketing, accountant, finance, in an esports space, because those teams, those programs still need those more traditional jobs. So they could take their love of video games, maybe a more traditional job that mom and dad would be, oh yeah, absolutely, go become an accountant. They could, combine their love of video games, with, a space that they really care about, the video game, world.
Now, of course, like you said, we were jumping ahead a little bit because because there's a lot that happened in between. Now, I would say you're probably one of those people who did not rush to implement esports. You actually took the time to really think through it, but you did it at the middle school level when nobody was really thinking about how do we do this at middle school yet. So take us through, I guess, the genesis and the birth of the esports program at Fairhaven.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the origin story is interesting because I'm somebody that has a foot in both worlds. And so what I mean by that is I started in esports in 1998 when StarCraft came out.
That was me too, except I was terrible. But I used it as a teaching tool. Yeah.
For me, I was in 8th grade. I was playing it. I was entering I was entering local tournaments. I was hosting LAN parties with friends and people from around town. We would even travel a little bit around New Jersey if we heard that some computer store or something like that was having a tournament. And so my other foot is in traditional athletics.
Mm-hmm.
I did I did football, wrestling, and track in high school. I wrestled and did rugby in college.
Let me guess, you're a hooker, aren't you?
I was the post. I had to support my local hooker.
Okay, I'm a second row. I'm a lock.
There you go.
Yeah. So we were in the scrum pack together. We're doing a little. This has now become the rugby podcast.
Yes.
Where we're going to talk about our rugby injuries and things. No, but it sounds like we have a very similar background. Again, love of video games. We have a traditional athletic background, and then we're teachers.
Right. Yeah. And even beyond that, I got my first teaching job right out of college. I also got my first varsity coaching jobs right out of college. I was coaching varsity football, wrestling, and track at my local, at the high school I was teaching at, in 2006. Mm-hmm. So fast forward 2011, I have about 5 years teaching, 5 years coaching under my belt, all that traditional sports background, all that video game background since I was little. And my friends invited me to the first ever StarCraft 2 tournament here in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Okay.
So I went down. It was IPL. They had this big tournament at Caesars in Atlantic City, the casino. And dude, I was blown away by what I was watching. Mm-hmm. I never really kind of knew what esports was. I knew that I heard about matches and I did some Counter-Strike when I was in college and stuff like that. But when I actually went to a legit esports event, when they were chanting their favorite players' names, when they had walkout entrances like it was the WWE, they had casters and special effects and fireworks and sideline reporters, and they had a caster doing analysis. They had a caster, who was the funny colored commentator. I did not know it existed on that level. And somebody like me, I love a big show, right? I say go big or go home in everything that I do. And sitting there in that crowd and thinking about traditional sporting backgrounds and the kids I knew I had in the classroom, from 2011, I said to myself, there are so many kids that I teach that would benefit from the competition, that traditional athletics have, but are maybe not the right size or maybe don't, want to play more traditional sports. And so since 2011, I was trying to convince my high school at the time to let me start, a StarCraft 2 team. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to say, look, it's going to draw an underrepresented type of kid, the kind of kid who goes home and plays video games by himself and has no homeschool connection. These are the kind of kids I bet that I could get to come out for the team. And the high school, was a hard no. Fast forward till I got that middle school job. And my second year there, I started to hound the Board of Ed. I felt comfortable. I'd been there for a year or two. People knew who I was. They knew how I ran my program. They knew the energy that I put into my program and in the classroom. And so I started to talk to my Board of Ed. I said, okay, what do I have to do to get you to let me start a esports team? Mm-hmm. And I was very clear. And this is something, I harp about when I talk about esports all the time. I didn't want to start a video game club. Right. If you had my kids on the podcast, one thing they would tell you that I always say, and it was the same thing I said to my wrestlers, same thing I said to my football players, we're not here to have fun. We're here to win, right? Putting in the time and the energy to win matches.
I know that we've struggled with that here as well, too. And I will say that one of our general managers, his name is Travis Witt. He's also the offensive line coach at Park High School here in Racine. Okay. Yeah. And what's great about having him, and kind of the similar what you're saying too, is he very early in the season said, is this competition or is this casual? Because if this is casual, you can reschedule every match. You can give everybody every, excuse, and you'll never play a match because nothing will ever be perfect. Even we were getting into state playoffs. And one of the kids at one of the other schools we were supposed to play that day actually got into a car accident. Now, was it a serious accident? No, he got rear-ended. He was perfectly fine. They didn't even have to take him to the hospital. But they were calling us saying, well, can we reschedule because he went home? Well, and of course, Travis says, if the star quarterback of the other team gets hurt, you don't reschedule the football game because the star quarterback got hurt. You play the game.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the mentality that I wanted to start my esports team with, because I truly believe that esports would provide the structure, the competition that some of these kids weren't getting anywhere else. And as an athlete, I'm sure you could talk about all the things that rugby gave to you and all the other sports gave to you. You know, for me, it was a big, as a developer, for my personality, my attitude, my outlook on life, you know, traditional sports, as anything I learned in the classroom.
It'll be silly to say too that for me, rugby, yes, huge part, but for me, just as I wouldn't call it necessarily as competitive, but it had a competitive mindset. And you're going to laugh a little bit, but I was in the marching band at Purdue University.
Right.
Big Ten school, you have to show, doesn't matter how cold or hot it is, you show up in that uniform and you perform, and you go out and you do your halftime. If you screw up, you just own it and you just go on and go about your day. But that's the thing that kept me in college was rugby and marching band.
Absolutely. And you had competition in marching band, and you had to practice, you had to be there. And if you got rear-ended, the show didn't stop because you weren't there.
Yeah. And you had to have your uniform pressed, and you had to, you had inspection. I mean, they ran it like a pseudo military operation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I can imagine the value of somebody who has absolutely no musical talent and inability to march in time or anything like that. I can still imagine, I can still see, you know, what you got out of it. And that's one thing I always find myself having to preach about esports is, okay, put aside the fact that we're playing video games, right? Pretend it was a sport, pretend it was marching band, right? The fact that you have a team that relies on you, you need to be somewhere, you need to be a certain way, you need to put the team before yourself, you have to make sacrifices. Esports gives all of those things to people that are part of the program. And so making them see that value, you know, is really important. But so what was exciting, after about a year of doing homework and research and going kind of back and forth with administration, the board of ed, who are all very supportive. Don't get me wrong, they were not supportive, but obviously there were concerns. Right out the gate, they said anything that involves violence or guns is out. Even League of Legends, they said, was too violent. They didn't like the way that women were portrayed. And so after, you know, about a year of homework and hard work, the only game they would approve was Rocket League. And so the year after, you know, start of the school year after, September 2018, I had my first practice for, you know, what I believe is the first ever middle school esports team coming together, you know, kind of flying under the sports banner. And, you know, right out of the gate, we had a problem where, well, really two, I guess, is my kids that first year had no homeschool connection. The kids, right, I had 18 kids that came out after school. And, you know, I surveyed them, interviewed them, did a Google form to collect that data that would help convince my board of ed, you know, to let me continue the year after. What we found is my kids kind of just went home. And so we know, obviously, that kids who have a homeschool connection do better. So I was really excited to have 18 kids now staying after school, now coming in for lunch and recess to practice, where they had kind of been doing their own thing before. And the second problem we faced, besides the fact that, you know, they had to come together, learn how to be part of a team, you know, learn how to commit themselves to something greater than themselves. The second problem that we had is, being the first middle school, there were no other middle schools to play.
Right.
And so what kind of really put my program on the map is I started to email every college I could find that had an esports program and challenging them to a match. And some of them emailed me back, oh, we're not playing middle schoolers. But there were some colleges, and I got to give a shout out to Rutgers Esports. Rutgers could not have been more excited to be part of that program, you know, to play my kids.
I do have to laugh, though, a little bit. Again, knowing the Big Ten like I do, I mean, a middle school football team could beat Rutgers. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Those of you who are Rutgers, I'm sorry. I had to get that out there, but still, that's a level of competition that's unique to this, because you're not going to see a high school basketball team play a college, and you're not going to see a middle school football team play a college team. But the fact that we can break down barriers and say, look, age in this case doesn't matter. The size of this person doesn't matter. But those are connections that, like, especially for the middle school, not so much to the college kids, but the middle school kids, they're going to remember that. You know, they'll remember those things.
And that's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about why we need esports in every school. Esports gives you the value that traditional sports does, right? Also, it adds a level of accessibility that does not exist in traditional esports, right? The kids I have in my program, many of them are...
You mean traditional sports, not traditional esports?
Yes, traditional sports. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Right.
Yeah.
The idea that esports is so accessible, right? The idea that I have many students that have IEPs, 504s, perhaps are on the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
right? They couldn't play other sports.
Mm-hmm.
Or on my team, I have students who are just too small
Mm-hmm.
to play traditional sports. The fact that they can come together and play college students or somebody of any size, just kind of shows part of the value is the fact that it's accessible on a level that traditional sports is not.
Yeah.
And so we played Rutgers, and obviously we got our doors blown off. But one of the things I wanted to make sure we did was afterward, we played Rutgers twice that first year. Once virtually, they played from campus, we played from our school. We Skyped them and we had them introduce themselves, talk about their majors, how they're turning their love of video games into a career.
Mm-hmm.
And then later in that year, we invited them. They came to our school. We played, but the big emphasis was the round table afterwards, where my kids got to ask questions about college. What is college like? And one of the big, things that kind of hit me was I had a few kids who kind of came to me after and said, look, I never kind of saw college as an option for me, or I wasn't excited about college, but talking to those students and knowing, I could follow my love of video games through middle school. My kids who graduated middle school started a high school program at our sending high school, because my district's K-8. But my kids started a program at their sending high school, and let's say they want to go to Rutgers, they can be a part of an esports team all the way until they're ready for a career.
Right.
And so that sense of belonging, right, that pipeline, I call it, the idea that, I'm having, in 2 weeks, I'm having my first alumni game, where my kids who have graduated from my program are going to come back and we're going to play. That's half the program. But the other half of the program is my kids that are now in high school are going to talk to my kids in middle school and say what the transition was like. Mm-hmm. How is high school different than middle school? So you're talking about my kids now have a family, something to be a part of from middle school to high school. I have that connection with Rutgers. They can go to Rutgers and have friends that they've known, have, peers waiting for them to welcome them. And so for me, that pipeline, that sense of belonging is another reason why every school should have an esports team.
And what you're helping the kids find too is their tribe, and they'll find out that tribe extends, just like how in college even there's that. Again, going back to my experience in the marching band, I can still find marching band people, connect with them, even if I didn't go to school with them at that time. It's amazing how these people connect. It's just like how fraternities or sororities are connected even after the fact. The fact that you've got your kids now connecting across grade levels and across school buildings is a huge and a very interesting step. And I love how you created that roundtable discussion with the colleges. You now have that, you're connecting the kids back to the high school kids and the middle school kids together, which, in most school districts, middle and high school do not touch. They do not talk. They do not try to interact. It's one world and another. So it's really cool that you're using esports in that way to connect the generations of kids coming up and going through.
Yeah. And so I'm even excited on the 31st of this month. We're making our first site visit where we're going to Stockton University, and we're going to play Stockton at Stockton in their esports arena. Mm-hmm. And afterward, again, talk to the students about careers and college and what it's like, and let my kids ask questions. But then we're also going to get a campus tour. Okay. So now my kids as middle schoolers are going to see an esports arena, going to go see a college campus and have an experience that maybe they wouldn't have until they were sophomores or juniors and really looking for a college to call home, right? So starting that process, getting them thinking about college and career readiness at a younger age is another way that you can use esports.
Now, just to kind of shift gears about the development of your program, I know a lot of programs start off with it's typically boys, and it takes a while for the girls to come, and you really have to recruit. How has your experience been recruiting to diversify, I guess, from just having a team of all boys to trying to get at girls who we know love to game,
right,
but don't always necessarily see as esports as necessarily for them?
Yeah, so it's been a journey. I think like every other program out there, it's a male-dominated space. Mm-hmm. I think the space comes with baggage, whether you buy into it or not, that gamers and gaming are so toxic. And, But one of the things that I made sure I did, and this was from talking to NASEF, the North American Scholastic Esports Federation, and kind of working with them to make sure, part of the homework I was doing before my team started to make sure that my space was a safe, inclusive space. And so I had a code of conduct that I follow, very seriously. My kids know how serious I am about it. On top of one of the ways that I convinced my board of ed to let me start the esports team is all the negative things that they had, right? The misogyny and racism, the toxicity that, they've heard from their own kids and stuff like that, tackling that stuff head on, right? In my program, talking to my kids about how they may, and my kids are wonderful kids, but they may be, on a place like Reddit or a place like 4chan, or they might see a meme on social media and they think it's funny, but they don't know that it has a racist or misogynistic background, right? So tackling all those things to educate my kids to make sure that they're being good, digital citizens. By creating that space, it took a year, but in this September, I did get my first girl on the team. She's fantastic. And I think a big part of it is both of her brothers are on the team.
Nice.
And they're one of those families that, her and her two brothers all get along. They all enjoy each other's company, and so I think the fact that she, saw that her brothers were on the team, knew that her brothers would take care of her. She came out and she's, has been an impact player for the team. And I'm hoping that other girls will see her being successful. She wears her jersey to school, when we have matches, and I'm hoping that she'll inspire other girls to come out for the team. But it's a journey. And, the biggest thing I say is you have to tackle it head on. Diversity and inclusiveness is a choice. So having, that code of conduct and working through those things head on in your program, is another thing that we can use esports for. A lot of people talk about the social emotional components, and a lot of people stop at talking about leadership and teamwork when it comes to social emotional. But even the better esports programs we're seeing at the high school level and even at the college level now are starting to talk about health and wellness.
Oh yeah.
Right?
We actually in our program, we have 2 days of weight training and movement because we know that weight training impacts decision making in the brain. So when people seem to think that, oh, I got to lift 400 pounds and all that. It's like no, because a lot of our kids have avoided exercise. They think that because they're playing video games, they kind of almost buy into the stereotype. But what's interesting is when you tell them, if you really want to get better, here's the things you have to do, and you start talking about drinking water and getting your sleep and limiting your gameplay so you're not playing right up until the time you go to bed and it's amazing when you have that conversation in that way, because again, the intrinsic motivations around gameplay, that they actually buy into that more than if you stuck them in a health class and said you should drink more water, you should get your sleep. They don't connect. It's very difficult to connect those things together.
And so, going back to it, think about it. We talk about social emotional learning in esports. We got the basic soft skills, teamwork, leadership, and that's where a lot of programs stop. You got your higher level, mostly college, really advanced, high school programs, mostly out in California. They're starting to talk about health and wellness, right? And to make your place safe and inclusive, you have to hit that third level of that social emotional piece, and it's what Steve Isaacs and I, close friend who does a lot of esports that
I've had Steve on. I know Steve well. Yeah.
And so something we talk about is that third level of social emotional learning in esports is helping teach kids how to navigate digital culture. Because I really believe we as adults have done a terrible job preparing kids for digital culture.
Oh, absolutely.
And there are so many things that happen online that parents have absolutely no clue about. And those are one of the things I address in my program. And by addressing those digital culture issues and talking to my students about what Gamergate was, and talking to my students about places like Reddit and 4chan, and all these different things that go on online and in gaming culture, right? I'm hoping to educate them so they'll be more accepting to whoever they're playing with, and even to that point, when we talk about digital sportsmanship, one thing I included is after every match, we Skype the other team so my kids can see the faces of the people who previously were just hidden behind the screen. And so by hitting on that kind of third level of digital sportsmanship and that third level of kind of digital culture, right? I'm really trying to create a safe space, inclusive space for all my kids. So that way, more girls will come out, or any LGBTQ students who want to come out for my team will feel comfortable, because I make that a priority. Like I said, being inclusive and being diverse is a choice. It takes active recruiting.
And talk about that recruiting, because again, and I feel like every time I hear this about recruiting, we have to say this, and I want to make this point too, because I think that's what you're going. Yeah. Just because do the old Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come, is not at all. And anybody who tells you, oh, if you just build an esports program and the kids will just know to show up, there's somebody you shouldn't be listening to, because that is absolutely not the case. As much as kids love video games, they're not going to do that.
Absolutely. And so what I'll do is, kids on my team or during class throughout my day, I'm basically like a detective. Mm-hmm. I asked hey, who are you playing Rocket League at home with that's not in this room? Right. I asked my female player, I said, do you play with any other girls at home? Mm-hmm. And so when I find out, Jen in this room, or what, she plays Rocket League, I go and I tell her, my team is not as good as it could be because you're not on it. What do I have to do to get you to come give it a try? Mm-hmm. And so actively recruiting female gamers, actively recruiting gamers of color, actively recruiting LGBTQ gamers. Anything I do that I can bring those kids onto my team is going to make my team better. And so I'll put in the time to go find them.
And I want to jump back to the digital citizenship part too, because that's a tremendously important part. We, in the Racine Unified School District, we have our 5 high school teams. We have one shared Discord server between all 5 of our teams. So we have the general space where everybody is in, and then each school has their own separate, so they can do their own internal stuff. But two of the channels that I added late, and these came from suggestions from students. Number 1, they wanted a meme channel, and number 2, they wanted an art channel. And the meme channel was interesting, but it truly, it became a real learning space. Again, because you talk about, there's kids who think something is really funny and they'll post it. And then you have to take them back and say, let's talk about why this is inappropriate. You may not understand this, but let's talk about what this is. Again, we're wrapping it around this intrinsic motivation that kids want to play video games. They want to be part of this culture. Now they're listening. The worst teaching experiences I've ever had was teaching kids about digital citizenship. Hey, watch this video and don't do this, and watch your digital footprint, and careful where you go online, and but putting it into these spaces where these kids have to live together in this digital walled garden. So it doesn't come into this Lord of the Flies experience where a lot of our kids we wonder why Riot, as a bunch of 30-year-olds with a toxic culture. Well, they grew up online with schools not participating in online spaces, and they thought all this was funny and cute, and they think it's fine. And it's not, and we know it's not, and we just never had a really good way to teach them. So again, not being afraid to leverage the social media aspects like we are able to, at least at the high school level, because middle school, I think you're a little more restricted about what you can do. But again, teaching kids in authentic ways about how to navigate digital spaces is a huge plus in all this that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it. And I think, and this goes back to, again, Steve Isaacs, who always says, if we could be that positive role model and model for students what interacting online should look like and what gaming online should look like, we should do it. We don't want kids doing these by themselves in their room, no supervision. I would argue most parents don't know what their kids are up to online. And I think kids find themselves in sticky situations, most of the time not by their own doing. And they don't know how to interpret or deal with what they experience. Or on the other hand, and you see this behavior, at least definitely in middle school, we call them edgelords, people who just want to be edgy and push the envelope because they want the attention and they think it's funny and they're trying to impress people. And that's all behaviors and things that we can address and we can model, and we can hopefully mold these students, it's crazy to me that when you add a little bit of anonymity to people's online activities, that some of these people just go bananas. And for me, if you look at like the comments on, CNN, Fox News to some of these articles, these are adults that are writing
Oh yeah.
the craziest things you've ever. So how, when that's how the adult population acts online, who is there to help these students know how to navigate digital culture? And that's a big reason why, again, I think every school needs an esports team. It's a way, like you said, you have this captured audience excited about video games. Hey, when we're not practicing, when we're not in a match, we're also going to talk about how you act online or how people act online and why they act that way. Because if you are, you can say that you're just being funny or whatever the case may be, but if you're posting misogynistic, homophobic, racist stuff, there's probably something going on there that we need to get to the bottom of. There became somewhere that you thought it was okay, and we got to find the way to coach you up so you don't think something like that's okay.
And the other issue you kind of touched on was, again, the kids. We talked about kids hiding in their basements or their bedrooms and playing these games. We also have the problem that we need to help our adults, because a lot of adults keep telling kids what you're doing is a waste of time, what you're doing is a waste of time. And every time a kid hears that, especially one who loves to play video games, imagine being told every day that the thing that you love to do the most is a waste of time. And of course you're going to go hide in your basement. Of course you're going to hide it away. I'll tell you, 100%. Every time I meet a kid, I work as a director of digital virtual learning. So I oversee all the libraries. So I get to go meet all the kids. And the icebreaker question I always ask is, what video games do you play?
Yeah.
If the child's parent is around and I ask that question, they will either do a side-eye glance at their parents, or their parent will kind of look at them and say, you can tell them what you play. And it's this weird thing that even if it's just me asking a kid, some kids are very embarrassed for whatever reason to say what video games they play. And we need to do, I think, what a lot of these esports competitions have started to do, at least when we start to hold big events, is when the adults get in the room, they go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this isn't a dark basement. This isn't a bunch of weird things going on. This is real high-end competition that's taking place. It's so eye-opening to some parents to see this.
I mean, especially if, again, having to do the legwork and the research to convince, my board of ed and my administrators, and even some reluctant parents, here in New Jersey, probably the biggest esports team we have in the area is the New York Excelsior, the Overwatch League team. They're owned by the same people who own the Mets. And the fact that every NBA team, every hockey team is investing in an esports team, they see it from a dollar and cents perspective, but it's been a great way to help parents understand like the level of esports, the fact that these major companies are diversifying their portfolio by investing in esports teams kind of shows you that this industry is going to boom. It's not going bust anytime soon. So, I can't remember. I got to go back and find it. But one of the things I remember reading about and talking to somebody from Blizzard about, I believe the number that they said is for every one professional esports player they have in the Overwatch League, there's something like 10 to 12 behind the scenes jobs that make that professional player career possible.
Oh, I believe it.
And so you just talk about from a STEM perspective, and the jobs are there, and convince parents that, the chances are your kid's not going to be a professional video game player. They're more likely to get into the NFL, but there's a very good chance that they can find themselves somewhere in that industry doing a traditional job or a more esports oriented job.
Now, let's shift gears just a little bit because, yes, the careers are definitely there. But let's talk about some of the work you've done to kind of move, I guess, the needle for everybody here in education. On the Teched Up Teacher website, you have your esports guide. And again, as I believe I'm correct, it is the second version of the guide, as the first one came out a couple of years ago. And it's free for anybody to grab. You just send them your email address and you'll get a copy. I guess from the first version to now, what do you see as maybe being one of the biggest changes from the first version to now?
Yeah, so when I first wrote the guide, and I wrote the guide because I was getting, and still I'm getting upward of about a dozen emails a day. How do I do this? How do I get started? And that was the original first version, was the more general, How do I get started? What is esports? And so I kind of wrote this guide, honestly, because I was tired of answering emails.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote the guide. And again, the most popular section in the first version was the section I had. It was called like point counterpoint. And it was about how to convince stakeholders that esports was valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And it took you, it provided the research and took you through a point by point argument for all the, the things that you can anticipate people being worried about.
Sure.
And now in that second version, that's a few months old, it's now saying, okay, I have approval for an esports team. I don't actually know how to run an esports team. And so the second version is, what does an esports practice look like? How do you hold tryouts?
Mm-hmm.
How do you set up a match? How do you find matches? How do you conduct yourself during matches? Or a popular one I just added, or will be adding, I can't remember if I've done it yet, but whether it's a couple days, how do I talk to my IT department about opening ports and letting games through firewalls, and how to do that without letting the viruses and the Russians in.
And you did do a really good blog post about that, and I'll link to that article that you did. So
that blog post will be in the guide. I can't, like I said, I think I have it. I don't know if I just published it yet, but that's come from, I would say in the last month, I've gotten a huge, spat of people asking me, hey, thanks. We have our esports team approved, but the people in IT are giving me a hard time, and I have no idea what they're talking about when they're talking about access points and
mm-hmm.
port forwarding and all that stuff. So I reached out to, my people in IT. I have a close friend who's a big a high up IT guy here in Jersey,
mm-hmm.
And just talking to them and saying, okay, if somebody were to come to you to start an esports team, what do you need from the IT perspective? What were your concerns? And so if you can anticipate somebody's concerns, right, you could do the legwork in advance. So I'd say that's the biggest difference, is how do I get started versus now it's okay, I have a team, but I have no idea how to have a team.
And let's also make sure, if you're listening to the podcast and you're in kind of a similar situation that Chris is talking about, me being a former IT director, don't ask your IT director to make these changes a day before or the day of an event.
That's one of the biggest tips.
You have to. IT life is very different than school life. We do a lot of stuff on the fly sometimes in schools, but with IT work, you need to give them a good lead and make sure they're involved early in the conversation.
Absolutely, they're the most important stakeholder that most people who are starting an esports team ignore. Yeah. They talk to the board of ed, they talk to administrators, they talk to students, they talk to parents. Once everybody's on board, then they turn around and they go, oh, we haven't dealt with IT at all. They haven't been part of the conversation. Even expanding from the game itself to a lot of schools want to stream the games on Twitch,
mm-hmm.
right? Twitch in and of itself is a whole separate issue on top of getting the game dealt with that you got to figure out too, and that all usually goes back to IT.
And you got to have, and that even, I know from my experience with my school district, talking to our communications director, a district of our size, we have somebody who's involved in communication. They say, well, we don't want to just use this for video games. We want to use this for a whole lot of other things. Can we do that?
Right.
The great thing about Twitch is you can stream whatever you want. So if you want to stream your high school football games, basketball games, graduation ceremonies, whatever, you can do that. But again, if you have those people in district, again, because this becomes such a powerful communication tool, it is well worth the time to also introduce this idea to saying, hey, let's talk about the grand ramifications of us being able to stream in this live sort of way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, with the guide, of course, you have years of experience doing this. You also recently spoke down in Miami at the FETC conference, which I think used to be the Florida Educator Technology Conference, and now it's what, Future
of Education, I believe.
Yeah, Future of Education Technology Conference.
Yep.
And as we were kind of chit-chatting before we started recording here, go back 2-3 years and you'd have an esports session and people would just not come, or they weren't sure what to make of it. They weren't sure where to put it. And now, of course, you, as I saw from a lot of the tweets, I was not able to be there myself, but FETC seemed to be quite the bit coming out party, I guess, for esports for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I was blown away. I was super excited. I was invited down by FETC and the National Association of Esports Coaches and Directors, NACAD,
Yep.
to be part of a panel, as well as to talk about my program along with Steve Isaacs. Our programs are closely intertwined because his was the first middle school after mine I was able to activate. And so the first ever middle school esports match was my team versus Steve Isaacs' team. So he and I, we do this thing called Tale of Two Esports Teams. And as you know, Steve kind of comes at esports as a more casual, way, where I come from a hyper competitive, and how both programs are very successful despite the intentionality being so different. So I went down to FETC. Not only were there not only was there a whole esports strand where you could, from the start to finish, every hour go hear a panel or somebody talking about esports, but down on the showroom floor, beside the fact that every vendor was pushing some sort of esports setup, there was NASEF, who we mentioned earlier, teamed up with CDW and built themselves an arena. And NASEF, who is really big in Florida, has helped Florida start a very serious statewide esports program.
Yes.
They had kids from all over Florida in this esports arena built in the vendor area, playing each other along with talks from people. So, my other gig during the day, like I said, is entrepreneurship. There were not any entrepreneurship sessions at FETC. I was looking to hopefully attend some, but I basically spent, from wheels up to wheels down, in esports sessions at FETC. And so, having been talking about esports going on almost 3 years now, this is the first conference I've been to where esports has had its own strand and been a priority. So it was really kind of eye-opening. I got to meet a lot of people I've connected with online. Got to meet, Dr. Chris Haskell from Boise State.
He's great, isn't he?
He's just the coolest dude ever. But I would argue that they probably have one of the best, if not the best, college esports programs in the country.
But why they do? It's interesting when you talk. Dr. Haskell, do you know what his background is? What he did?
I know a little bit, but tell me.
He was a band director.
Right.
And so when I interviewed him also for the podcast, and it's still one of my favorite episodes that I've done,
right.
He sees esports as like the band. Mm-hmm. And he believes that if you want to be part of it, he'll find a role for you. So he's all about adding chairs. So like in band, you always need kids in percussion, right? Can you hit a triangle? If you can hit a triangle and you can do it on a tempo, we'll have you in band. Yeah. So his ideas around why I think his program has gotten so much buy-in is because he will take anybody and find something for them to do.
Yeah, and that's how I want my program to be. And that brings me to, kind of that third tenet that I'm passionate about is you have to have a team behind the team. And Haskell does a great job. He has his players, but then his support staff, right? I have kids on my team who are players, but then I also have players who have additional roles, as well as kids on my team who have no interest of playing.
Right.
I have a kid who just wants to be the team podcaster. I have a kid who just wants to be the team journalist. My kids do all the marketing. My kids design the jerseys. They do the video editing, the graphic editing. They do the event planning. I tell my kids, if you think that we're going to play this school on this day, then you need to make sure that you fill out the paperwork to rent the library. If you want people to come watch, well, then you better do the marketing to get people there. I'm trying to, get them more into social media and kind of posting what we're doing in practice. Tomorrow I have practice. We have 12 teachers from school districts around my area coming to see them practice. And we had been talking about, okay, well, when you're not playing, how are you going to engage these educators and share your passion for esports and why their school should have one so kids like you can play on their team? So now we're working on our public speaking skills. I have a kid who I'm trying to convince to become my full-time caster. He's not very good at Rocket League, but he loves it. He can call the action.
That would be me.
He's a little bit nervous to be, the on-air personality, but I would love to get to the point where I have, like I said earlier, the analytical caster, the color commentator who's there to make people laugh, and then they throw it to the sideline reporter who interviews the kids coming into or out of a matchup. And so all those things that Haskell is doing, adding people, is what makes esports that, that much more amazing. So anybody you can add to a program, is just, again, going to make your program better.
Seeing when you talked about the vendor area, and it seems like everybody's got an esports product now, I do grow concerned around things like that, of course, because now, esports shouldn't be a turnkey solution. As you talked about, your difference between what you do versus what Steve Isaacs does, even though you two compete against each other, Steve's philosophy and your philosophies are still different around competition, though there's a lot of the similarities there.
Right.
Coming out of FETC, what was something, like I said, to me, the vendor area and seeing everybody trying to pitch an esports product,
Right.
what would be a concern to you coming out of FETC of maybe something you saw or a trend or?
I mean, easy. Two major concerns I have about esports. Number one is there's a huge equity issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some of these schools just can't afford the technology or the funding to make the esports team the way that they believe it should be, right? A lot of these companies are pitching that you need, I kind of turned my esports badge around and I went around and talked to the vendors, and they were like, well, you need a 144 megahertz monitor. Here's, a 72-inch one that's going to cost you $600 per station. And then you team that up with our, small form factor desktop. This, one station will charge you $1,800. Meanwhile, I've helped, the middle school esport league I've started has something like 28 teams now. I've helped half those teams say, I've helped half those teams get online by saying, have your kids bring in their Xboxes, right? Bring your own device, get a couple Rocket League accounts or use their Rocket League accounts that your kids have, and we'll play it. Right.
That's the beauty of that game is it's cross-platform. So
exactly.
It is great for that.
Yeah. And the league I have is run on a Google spreadsheet and Discord. I don't charge people to be part of the league. Mm-hmm. There was no league, so I started it myself. And so that brings me to the other major concern I have is all of these for-profit companies. Play Versus, who closed like a $15 million round of funding a couple years ago, was there talking about the value of esports and education.
Well, now they're up to $96 million in funding.
So now you're talking about, that means they have 96 million reasons that they have to answer to their investors before they answer to educators and students, mm-hmm. right? So the monetization, in the same way I get frustrated with some of the things I see in the college or even the military, a lot of these for-profit companies are talking to students about, well, you're going to be an esports pro, and so join our league, and then we'll get you noticed by colleges, and we'll get you a scholarship, and just they're selling this dream along with this expensive equipment and selling the idea that you have to invest a ton of money to have esports and education, and you don't. You don't have to. And so those are my two big concerns: is what are we doing about the technology equity gap, and what are we doing to protect our kids when all of the for-profit people are coming in looking to make a fast buck and get a piece of the pie off of our kids?
Yeah, I'm starting to have concerns too around some of the data privacy, because there are companies that are starting to creep up now that are trying to make connections between high school kids and colleges in particular, or high school kids and the pros, not necessarily understanding that, college kids, totally different story. But when you're talking about 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, your terms of service, your data privacy has to be top notch. And a lot of them are coming in not really even considering that they have to, if they want to have it to be something institutionally centralized so that coaches can see who's making contact with their kids. I mean, we got to think about what the data privacy is going to be for our kids' footprint in all of this. And so I know that's one of the issues I've seen start to creep up recently as well too, because again, it is so, while it seems like there's colleges all over the place that have scholarships available for kids, there's no good way, because I will cheer when the NCAA goes out of business. I will throw up I will be so happy. I want the Big Ten to just tell the NCAA, we're taking our conference and we're going to go do our own thing. We don't actually need you for any of this stuff. But what the NCAA does do well is they have a window of when you can talk to a kid, when you can recruit them, what the recruiting season is, when you can sign them to scholarship, how many contacts you can have. We don't have that right now. So there's people coming at our kids or coming at us at all times of the year wanting to talk about college. And for some of our kids, they're either not ready to necessarily talk about college or they're not really interested. But then when you throw an esports thing in front of them, it's really important for us to work with our high school counselors and work with ourselves to really, it should be something to make a good fit for our kids, because we don't, while a scholarship is nice, some of these schools are still going to be very expensive for some of our kids. They're not going to be full rides like a football or a basketball scholarship. So we really have to help the kids navigate too. Yeah, they're giving you $20,000, but where are you going to come up with the other 15?
Right.
And you're going to be saddled with $60,000 of debt. I also am going to be very concerned, and I challenge the colleges and universities now to start publishing their graduation rates. Yes. I want to see graduation and churn rates, because if these kids are staying for 1 or 2 years, then what's the point?
Right. And yeah, please continue.
No, these are things that, sorry, I started to go off on a tangent of concerns, and that didn't even have FETC to do with, but
you're right though. And that probably comes from, the rugby and marching band background, similar to what I see from a former varsity football, high school, and wrestling coach. I have kids that are in Major League Baseball right now. Mm-hmm. I have kids that are on NFL football teams right now, and watching those recruits come in and what they promised, and hearing and seeing how my kids were flown out and wined and dined and promised and all these things. I see that becoming an issue, just like it is now for traditional sports. In the world of esports, is they're going to promise kids everything. Mm-hmm. Once you attend their school, they have your money, and then they're like, all right, well, thanks for coming.
Yep.
And so that's a concern, and I wouldn't be opposed to, I'm curious to see what NCAA does. I got to follow it a little bit better, but I know that they've kind of allowed some monetization to happen of people within the, kids basically to make money off their names now over the video game thing going on.
Yeah, Ed O'Banion and that whole thing with UCLA from 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah.
So I'm curious to see, is there going to be some kind of code of conduct put into place at that college level that basically says, you can monetize yourself by streaming on Twitch, but you can't take money from big sponsors, and, they can only talk to you if you're the certain age, and you can only have this many visits. I wonder if it's ever going to get to that point. And if it is, how we can make sure that, again, it's a program or a pipeline that benefits our kids. Like you said with the NCAA, I don't know if they treat the kids the best. And so this new esports kind of athlete, I want to see hopefully treated better, and maybe change how we're treating our traditional athletes, and kind of just elevate that whole thing.
I have a tweet, I'll have to dig it up, from a couple of years ago, where I said, it's going to be esports, I think, that's going to make the NCAA finally modernize its rules with how, kids can monetize themselves.
Yeah.
And I got some major pushback on that, but I want to go find that tweet now and repost that, because
get the receipts. You're right.
Because what we've seen now is, the fact is, yes, the NCAA is struggling with, what do we do with esports? And a lot of it is because they haven't figured out how to make a dollar off of it yet. And the other part is the genie's already out the bottle. The kids are already making money doing it. So how do you tell a kid who's already making money, you can't do that anymore? You have to be a pure amateur. And I don't see how that happens. So
look at I don't want to say, I don't know if great question, right? I was going to mention Booga. The kid from Pennsylvania who won
$3 million and 16 years old. Yeah.
I don't know if you classify him A, as a professional player, B, does that impact his future college, because he has made money off of himself and he makes a lot of money streaming now. Mm-hmm. If he does go out, Fortnite becomes an esport, is that a kid that you can recruit or would want to recruit, or he would want you to recruit him because he's making huge money on Twitch, huge money in endorsements, and the kid's like 17 years old and he's already got, $3 million,
right,
give or take, in his pocket. So how do you handle, those situations?
Well, it's a question that I don't think we'll have answers to tonight, but I think between you and I, we've got some pretty good ideas about, at least, I hope if people are listening to this or watching this, is that there's a lot of big questions out there that still need to be resolved. Chris and I don't have all the answers right now, but I think we've got some pretty good ideas. And Chris's website is well worth following. He's well worth the follow also on Twitter. And you also stream your team matches on Twitch, do you not?
Yes, we stream. If you go to FHK Esports, when we have a match, you will find my team in the action.
Okay. And last question before I give you the last option to plug anything else. Favorite video game you're playing right now?
So I had a son. He's 8 months old. Mm-hmm. Before that, I would have had said Overwatch, but now that I am a dad and I have no time, I would like to consider myself a professional one-handed Hearthstone player.
Nice.
So I got way into Hearthstone. It's the first mobile game I've ever played. And so right now I play Hearthstone, whenever I get a minute. I'll be up at 4 feeding him tonight, playing Hearthstone in the other hand. So
do you buy your cards or do you earn them and build them?
I did the $5 pack. I did the $50 expansion. Mm-hmm. But I'm now going free to play because I've been saving up my gold in between expansions. So bought to be competitive because I don't like to lose. And now just going off of gold.
Fantastic. Anything else you wish to promote or let us know about?
You covered it. Check me out at techedupteacher.com and at techedupteacher on all social media. If you are interested in esports, please download the guide, give it a read. If you have any questions after that, suggestions, or you want to play my middle school team in Rocket League, we will take on all comers, middle school, high school, college. Please reach out. Don't hesitate. Last week, my first book was published. It's called The Ed Corp's Classroom. It talks about how to use entrepreneurship to better engage your students in the classroom. There's a big section in there. There's a big section in there about how I had students who started esports businesses and have been doing really well for themselves. And I don't know if Steve told you, but Steve Isaacs, myself, Jesse Lubinsky, and Christine Lyons-Bailey from Ready Player One. We are writing an esports book that will come out through Dave Burgess Publishing.
You guys are interviewing me for that book.
We absolutely, how can we not have your voice? So that's looking for maybe a July, August ISTE, if we cross our fingers, release.
Okay.
And that's going to not only showcase amazing esports voices like yours, Jim, but also kind of take that how-to guide to help you get your esports team off the ground, practicing, playing matches, and being successful.
Fantastic. You going to have any other speaking gigs coming up anytime soon?
I am New Jersey. I am speaking at Texpo next week about esports. I am going out for the National Association of Esports Coaches and Directors Conference in Iowa in March.
I think I'll see you for that.
Excellent.
Yes.
And one of the real big things I think I could say, the New Jersey School Boards Association, so the union that all, well, I don't know if it's a union, I should probably know that. Anyway, but the association that all Board of Ed members, superintendents, administrators kind of belong to in New Jersey, have tapped me to make a statewide esports tournament at their conference in October.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so the fact that board members and superintendents and administrators are interested in this, and I can showcase talent off, from around New Jersey and celebrate, the amazing things that our kids are doing in esports. I'm really looking forward to that, but that's all the way in October. So that's just some of the stuff I got coming up.
Sounds great. Chris Aviles, thank you for being on the, let me see if I can get my podcast. Chris Aviles, thank you for being on the Academy of Esports podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.